She wore white to his ball by mistake in his family. It means, I accept. The gown was wrong. Evangeline Hartley knew it the moment Lady Meredith's maid finished fastening the last of the tiny pearl buttons that traced her spine like a whispered secret. She stood before the modest mirror in her borrowed chamber, and the woman who stared back at her seemed a stranger, a ghost dressed for a wedding she would never have. White silk cascaded from her shoulders to pool at her feet in an elegant train, the fabric so fine it seemed to capture and hold the candlelight like trapped moonbeams. Delicate silver embroidery traced patterns of winter roses along the bodice and hem, and the sleeves, fashionably short and puffed, left her arms bare except for the long white gloves that reached past her elbows. It was, without question, the most beautiful garment that had ever touched her skin. It was also entirely inappropriate for a companion. "Lady Meredith," Evangeline began, turning to face her elderly employer, who sat in an armchair by the fire wrapped in lavender silk and satisfaction. "I cannot possibly wear this. It's too fine. People will talk." "People always talk, my dear. It's the only exercise most of them get." Lady Meredith waved a wrinkled hand adorned with enough rings to fund a small estate. "The gown suits you. That lavender thing you brought makes you look consumptive, and I won't have my companion looking consumptive at the Thornfield Winter Ball. It reflects poorly on me. But white is a perfectly acceptable colour for an unmarried woman. You are unmarried, are you not?" The question held no malice, but it struck Evangeline like a physical blow nonetheless. Yes, she was unmarried. At 24 she was firmly on the shelf, a spinster in the making, kept from that final classification only by her youth and the convenient fiction that she might yet make a match. Never mind that she had no dowry, no connections, and no prospects. Never mind that her father had gambled away everything, the townhouse in Mayfair, the country estate in Hampshire, even her mother's jewellery, before drinking himself into an early grave and leaving his wife and daughter with nothing but debts and disgrace. "I am unmarried," Evangeline said quietly. "But I am also a companion, my lady. Companions do not wear white silk to balls. Companions wear grey or brown, or perhaps, if they are very fortunate, a modest lavender. Companions wear what their employers tell them to wear." Lady Meredith's tone brooked no argument. "And I am telling you to wear the white. Consider it a gift, if that salvages your pride. I had it made for my grandniece, but the ungrateful chit eloped with a soldier before she could wear it. The gown has been sitting in my wardrobe for 2 years, gathering dust and resentment. It deserves an outing." Evangeline opened her mouth to protest further, but the look in Lady Meredith's eyes stopped her. Beneath the imperious manner and the aristocratic disdain, there was something almost kind in the old woman's expression. Lady Meredith knew, as all of society knew, the circumstances of Evangeline's reduced situation. Perhaps this was her way of offering charity without calling it such, dressing her companion in silk so that for one night Evangeline might feel like the woman she had been raised to be rather than the woman circumstances had made her. Pride warred with practicality in Evangeline's chest. Pride, as always, lost. "Thank you, my lady," she said softly. "The gown is beautiful." "Of course it is. I have excellent taste." Lady Meredith rose from her chair with the assistance of her cane, her joints creaking in protest. "Now fetch my wrap, girl. The carriage will be ready shortly, and I won't be kept waiting. The Earl of Thornfield may be as cold as his name suggests, but his cook is exceptional, and I intend to partake liberally of the supper." Evangeline did as she was told, as she always did. She had learned in the 3 years since her father's death that survival required submission, that pride was a luxury the poor could not afford, that the measured death of one's dreams was preferable to the quick death of one's body from cold or starvation. She had learned to say, "Yes, my lady," and mean it, to swallow her opinions and her hopes and her desperate, furious grief until they sat in her stomach like stones. She had learned, in short, to be exactly what the world expected of a ruined gentleman's daughter: grateful, graceful, and entirely invisible. The carriage ride to Thornfield Manor took nearly 2 hours, the roads thick with snow that had fallen throughout the afternoon. Lady Meredith dozed against the velvet squabs, her snores providing a counterpoint to the rhythm of hooves and wheels, while Evangeline watched the winter landscape scroll past the frosted window and tried not to think about what awaited her. She had never attended the Thornfield Winter Ball. In the years before her father's disgrace, she had been too young to attend such sophisticated gatherings, and in the years after, she had been too far beneath notice to warrant an invitation. She knew of it. Of course, everyone in society knew of it. The Earl of Thornfield's annual ball was legendary, spoken of in hushed, reverent tones by debutantes and dowagers alike. The manor was said to be spectacular, a vast Palladian pile stuffed with old masters and older money. The supper was renowned. The guest list was so exclusive that an invitation was considered a mark of the highest social favour, and the Earl himself was considered the greatest prize of all. Lord Marcus Ashworth had been the subject of matrimonial speculation since before Evangeline was out of the schoolroom. The Stone Earl, society called him, for his cold demeanour and his apparent immunity to feminine charms. He had rejected proposal after proposal, or rather, he had made himself so thoroughly unapproachable that proposals died in the throats of hopeful mammas before they could be voiced. He attended the season irregularly, danced only when duty demanded it, and retreated to his estates at the earliest possible opportunity. He was said to be handsome, in a severe sort of way, and fabulously wealthy, and absolutely impossible. He was also said to be nursing a broken heart, though the details varied depending on who was doing the telling. Terrible business with his brother, Lady Meredith had mentioned over tea that morning, rousing from one of her frequent naps with the sudden energy of a woman who had remembered a piece of gossip. Edmund Ashworth, that was the younger one's name, ran off with Marcus's intended the week before the wedding, married her in Scotland, if you can credit it. The scandal nearly killed the old Earl. How dreadful, Evangeline had murmured, because that was what one said. It gets worse. Edmund took the chit abroad Italy, I believe, or perhaps Greece, and proceeded to drink and gamble his way through her dowry. Died of a fever within 2 years, leaving behind nothing but debts and a daughter. The current Earl has been raising the child ever since. Lady Meredith had shaken her head with something between disapproval and admiration. Say what you will about Marcus Ashworth, but he does his duty, even to the child of the brother who betrayed him. Evangeline had filed this information away with the detachment of one who had no stake in the Earl's personal tragedies. What did it matter to her if the Stone Earl had a wounded heart? She would likely never even speak to him. Companions did not speak to earls, not unless they were spoken to first, and men like Marcus Ashworth did not trouble themselves to address women like Evangeline Hartley. She was, after all, invisible. And tonight, wearing this ridiculous white gown, she intended to stay that way. Thornfield Manor emerged from the winter darkness like a ship breaching fog, its windows blazing with light that turned the falling snow to diamonds. Evangeline caught her breath despite herself. She had seen grand houses before, had grown up in one, in fact, before it was sold to pay her father's debts, but Thornfield was something beyond her experience. It sprawled across the landscape like a sleeping giant, its classical facade promising elegance and its sheer size promising overwhelming wealth. Carriages lined the circular drive, disgorging guests in an endless parade of silk and velvet, and liveried footmen stood at attention despite the cold, their breath clouding in the icy air. "Close your mouth, girl," Lady Meredith said, awake now and sharp-eyed. "You look like a fish." Evangeline closed her mouth. She reminded herself that she was here as a servant, however genteel the title. She was here to fetch Lady Meredith's shawl when she grew cold, to find Lady Meredith's friends when she wished to gossip, to guide Lady Meredith to the retiring room when she required privacy. She was not here to gape at chandeliers or admire architecture or wonder what it might have been like to arrive at such a ball as a guest rather than an appendage. She was not here to want anything at all. The entrance hall alone was larger than the entire ground floor of the cramped rooms Evangeline shared with her mother in London. A marble staircase swept upward in a graceful curve, and above it, a chandelier the size of a small carriage dripped crystals that caught and scattered the light of 100 candles. Guests milled about in glittering finery, their laughter and chatter creating a wall of sound that seemed almost physical. Somewhere deeper in the house, an orchestra was playing, and everyone was staring at Evangeline. She felt the weight of their gazes like a physical touch, prickling across her skin. At first, she assumed she was imagining it. Why would anyone look at her? But as she followed Lady Meredith through the press of bodies toward the ballroom, she could not escape the evidence of her own eyes. Women glanced at her, and then quickly away, whispering to their companions behind fans. Men looked and frowned, their expressions ranging from confusion to something almost like anticipation. A young debutante in pink actually gasped aloud when Evangeline passed. "Lady Meredith," Evangeline murmured, leaning close to her employer's ear. "People are staring." "Of course they are. You're beautiful." Lady Meredith patted her hand with absent affection. "Now stop fidgeting and try to look like you belong here. Confidence, girl. It's all anyone truly needs." But Evangeline did not feel confident. She felt exposed, as if she had wandered into the ballroom without her clothes. The white gown, which had seemed merely inappropriate in Lady Meredith's townhouse, now felt like a target painted on her chest. She did not know what these people saw when they looked at her. But whatever it was not what she had intended them to see. She wanted to find a dark corner and hide in it until the evening was over. She wanted to strip off this wretched gown and replace it with her comfortable, invisible lavender. She wanted to be anywhere in the world except here, in this glittering palace of light and wealth and staring eyes. Instead, she lifted her chin, straightened her spine, and followed Lady Meredith into the ballroom. The room was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. Hundreds of guests swirled across a parquet floor, polished to mirror brightness. The ladies' gowns creating a constantly shifting tapestry of color and light. The orchestra occupied a raised platform at one end, partially screened by arrangements of hothouse flowers that must have cost a fortune. At the other end, a line of French doors opened onto a terrace where guests might escape the heat of so many bodies, though given the snow falling beyond the glass, Evangeline doubted many would take the opportunity. She spotted the receiving line almost immediately, or rather, she spotted the crowd that had gathered near it, a cluster of guests waiting their turn to greet their host. And at the center of that crowd, elevated by nature if not by design, stood a man who could only be the Earl of Thornfield. He was tall, taller than she had expected, with broad shoulders that filled his black evening coat without the assistance of padding. His hair was dark, almost black in the candlelight, and it curled slightly despite what was clearly an attempt to tame it into submission. His face was handsome in the way of classical statues, all clean lines and strong bones, but there was something cold about it, something remote. He greeted each guest with mechanical precision, his bow exactly correct, his words presumably appropriate, but there was no warmth in his expression, no light in his grey eyes. The Stone Earl, indeed. Evangeline told herself to look away. It was impolite to stare, and besides, what did she care about the Earl of Thornfield? He was as far above her as the stars, as unreachable as the moon. She would never speak to him, never dance with him, never. He looked up. Across 30 feet of crowded ballroom, past the swirling dancers and the gossiping matrons and the nervous debutantes, his gaze found hers and held. Evangeline felt the impact like a blow to her chest, driving the air from her lungs. She had thought his eyes cold from a distance, but up close, or as close as 30 feet could be called, they burned with something that was not cold at all. Recognition, perhaps, though they had never met. Curiosity, though she was nobody worth being curious about. And beneath both, something darker, something almost like anger. She should have looked away. Every rule of propriety, every instinct of self-preservation screamed at her to drop her gaze, to blend back into the crowd, to remember that she was invisible and act accordingly. Instead, she stared back. The moment stretched, elastic and endless. Evangeline felt the rest of the ballroom fade away, the music and the laughter and the staring eyes all dimming to insignificance. There was only this man and his burning grey gaze, this inexplicable connection that she did not understand and did not want. Then someone jostled her elbow, the spell broke, and she looked away, her cheeks flaming. Ah, there's Lady Compton. Lady Meredith had noticed nothing, bless her near-sighted eyes. Take me to her, girl. I have a bone to pick about her whist party last month. Evangeline guided her employer across the room, careful to keep her back to the receiving line, careful to avoid looking in the Earl's direction again. Her heart was pounding as if she had run a race, and she could not quite catch her breath. What had that been? What had passed between them in that charged moment of eye contact? Nothing, she told herself firmly. He looked at me because everyone is looking at me, because of this wretched gown. He is probably wondering who had the audacity to attend his ball dressed like a bride. The thought, meant to be dismissive, landed wrong. Like a bride. Yes, that was exactly what she looked like, in her white silk and silver embroidery and pearl buttons. A bride, or a woman who wanted to be one. Evangeline pushed the thought away and concentrated on being invisible. For the next hour, she succeeded admirably. She installed Lady Meredith with Lady Compton and several other elderly aristocrats, fetched glasses of champagne and plates of delicacies, agreed that the younger generation had no manners, and the fashions were too revealing, and the Earl was unconscionably slow in choosing a bride. She faded into the background so thoroughly that several guests walked directly past her as if she were a piece of furniture. It was exactly what she wanted. It was exactly what she had spent 3 years perfecting. And yet, she could not stop her eyes from seeking out the Earl. He was no longer in the receiving line. He had moved into the ballroom proper, where he stood with a group of gentlemen, deep in conversation about something politics, probably, or horses, or whatever it was that gentlemen discussed at balls when they did not wish to dance. He had not looked in her direction again. There was no reason to suppose he even remembered her face. And yet, every few minutes, her gaze drifted toward him like a compass needle finding north. She noticed things. She noticed that he smiled occasionally, but the expression never reached his eyes. She noticed that he declined 2 invitations to dance, making polite excuses that fooled no one. She noticed that a small girl with dark curls and a white pinafore slipped through the crowd to tug at his coat sleeve, and that when he looked down at her, something in his face softened into genuine warmth. The child from Lady Meredith's gossip, Evangeline realized. The Earl's niece, the daughter of his faithless brother. She was perhaps 6 years old, far too young to be at such a late event, and her presence in the ballroom was raising eyebrows among the nearby matrons. But the Earl did not seem to care about propriety. He bent down to hear whatever she was whispering, and when he straightened, he was smiling, really smiling, not the mechanical courtesy he had offered his guests. Evangeline's heart gave an unexpected lurch. She looked away quickly, disturbed by her own reaction. What did she care if the Stone Earl loved his niece? What did it matter if there was warmth beneath the ice? Nothing. It mattered nothing. Miss Hartley? Evangeline startled at the sound of her name. She turned to find a footman at her elbow, his expression carefully neutral. "Yes? You are requested in the blue drawing room, miss, if you would follow me." Evangeline frowned. "Requested by whom?" "I am not at liberty to say, miss." The footman's face gave nothing away. "But it was impressed upon me that the matter is urgent." Urgent? What could possibly be urgent? Lady Meredith was happily ensconced with her friends, and Evangeline knew no one else at this ball. Perhaps there was some problem with their rooms they were staying the night, as were most of the guests, given the distance from London and the winter roads. She glanced toward Lady Meredith, who was absorbed in heated debate with Lady Compton, and would not miss her for some time. "Very well. Lead the way." The footman led her out of the ballroom and through a series of corridors that seemed designed to confuse. Thornfield Manor was a labyrinth of galleries and antechambers, each more opulent than the last, and Evangeline quickly lost her sense of direction. By the time they arrived at a door painted a deep, rich blue, she could not have found her way back to the ballroom without assistance. "In here, miss." The footman opened the door and stood aside. Evangeline stepped through and immediately knew she had made a mistake. The room was empty of other guests, or nearly so. A fire burned in the marble fireplace, casting dancing shadows across silk wallpaper and gilt-framed paintings. Chairs were arranged in conversational groupings, and a sideboard held decanters of various liquors. It was clearly a private space, meant for intimate gatherings rather than ball guests. And standing by the window, his back to her, was the Earl of Thornfield. Evangeline's first instinct was to flee. Her second was to demand to know the meaning of this summons. Her third, which she actually obeyed, was to stand very still and hope that somehow, impossibly, he had not noticed her enter. "Close the door, Miss Hartley." His voice was deep and cold, and he did not turn around. "We have much to discuss, and I would prefer we do so in private." "My lord, The door." Evangeline closed the door. She told herself it was only because the corridor was cold, not because his voice carried an authority she found herself helpless to resist. "My lord," she tried again, "I believe there has been some mistake. We have never been introduced. I don't even know how you know my name." Now he turned, and the full force of his attention hit her like a physical blow. Up close, he was even more imposing than he had appeared across the ballroom, taller, broader, his features sharper and more severe. His grey eyes swept over her from head to toe, lingering on the white gown in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Your name," he said flatly, "was easy enough to determine. Lady Meredith is not known for her discretion. As for introductions, I suspect we are rather past the point of such niceties." "I don't understand." "No." Something flickered in his expression. Anger, perhaps, or something more complex. "I don't suppose you do. Tell me, Miss Hartley, who put you up to this?" "Up to what?" "My lord, I truly don't understand what you're asking." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and masculine, with notes of cedar and smoke. "The gown," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Who told you to wear white to my ball?" "Lady Meredith insisted." Evangeline took an involuntary step backward. "It was meant for her grandniece, but the girl eloped before she could wear it. Lady Meredith said my own dress made me look consumptive. I didn't want to. I told her it was inappropriate, but she wouldn't listen. And I am in her employ, my lord. I cannot refuse her commands." "Cannot or will not?" "Cannot." Her temper, that familiar enemy, began to rise. "I am a companion, my lord, not a guest. I have no gowns of my own worth wearing to such an occasion. I wear what I am given and go where I am told, and try very hard not to draw attention to myself. I did not choose this gown, and I did not want this gown, and I certainly did not expect to be summoned to a private room and interrogated about my sartorial choices by a man I have never met." She had gone too far. She knew it the moment the words left her mouth. Companions did not raise their voices to earls. Companions did not express opinions at all, let alone express them with heat and conviction. She had just destroyed any hope of remaining invisible, any chance of escaping this ball with her position and her dignity intact. But instead of cold fury, something unexpected flickered across the Earl's face. Surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. "You genuinely don't know," he said slowly. "Do you?" "Know what?" Before he could answer, the door burst open and a woman swept into the room in a rustling wave of purple silk and commanding presence. She was perhaps 60 years old, her silver hair piled high in an elaborate style, her face handsome and imperious. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, and her eyes grey, like the Earl's, sparkled with barely contained excitement. "Marcus, I came as soon as I heard. Is it true? Have you finally—" She stopped short at the sight of Evangeline, and her face transformed with an expression of pure delight. "Oh, my dear girl. Let me look at you." Before Evangeline could protest or flee or do anything at all, the woman had crossed the room and seized her hands, examining her with the thoroughness of a farmer appraising livestock. "Beautiful," the woman breathed. "Absolutely beautiful. And the gown white, as tradition demands. Oh, Marcus, you sly creature, you never said a word. When did you meet her? How long have you been planning this? Tell me everything immediately." "Mother," the Earl began, his voice strained. "Lady Meredith's companion, I'm told. An unconventional choice, to be sure. But I always said you would surprise us when you finally made up your mind. And she's a Hartley, isn't she? The Hampshire Hartleys were perfectly respectable before that unpleasant business with the father. Good breeding there, good bones. The children will be handsome." "Children?" Evangeline's voice came out as a squeak. "My lady, I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding." "No need for modesty, my dear. The whole ballroom is buzzing with the news. Lord Thornfield's chosen bride, wearing white as every Ashworth bride has worn to the winter ball for 5 generations. The woman, the Dowager Countess, Evangeline realized with dawning horror, beamed at her. "I must confess, I had nearly given up hope. Marcus has been so stubbornly resistant to every suitable young lady I've presented. But you've clearly found the key to his heart, and I couldn't be more pleased." The room tilted. Evangeline gripped the back of a nearby chair to keep herself upright. "White," she whispered. "The white gown. What does it mean?" The dowager's brow furrowed with confusion. "What does it, my dear? Did Marcus not explain the tradition when he proposed? The Ashworth white is the most romantic story in our family history. When the 5th Earl's intended was denied permission to marry him by her cruel father, she wore white to the winter ball as a public declaration of her acceptance. It was her way of saying that no power on earth could keep them apart." The dowager's eyes grew misty. "Ever since then, the chosen bride of every Ashworth Earl has worn white to the winter ball to signal her acceptance of his proposal. And now you—" "I haven't proposed to Miss Hartley," the Earl said quietly. "We have never met before tonight. She wore the gown in ignorance, Mother. She did not know what it meant." The dowager's face went through a complicated series of expressions, confusion, then denial, then dawning horror that mirrored Evangeline's own. "But everyone saw," the dowager breathed. "The whole ballroom. Lady Compton asked me directly if it was true, and I confirmed. I was so certain." "You confirmed it?" The Earl's voice was sharp as cut glass. "Mother, what exactly did you say?" "Only that I was delighted, and that I expected an announcement before the evening was over." The dowager pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "Oh dear, oh dear. The gossip will have spread through the entire house by now. Every person at this ball believes you are engaged to this girl." Evangeline's knees buckled. She sank into the chair she had been gripping, her mind spinning. Engaged. Everyone believed she was engaged to the Earl of Thornfield. Everyone believed she had somehow trapped the most eligible bachelor in England into matrimony through a centuries-old tradition she had never heard of. Her reputation, what little remained of it, was ruined. Not merely ruined, obliterated. When the truth came out, as it inevitably would, she would be branded a fortune hunter, a schemer, a desperate spinster who had worn white to catch an earl. No one would employ her after this. No family would hire a companion with such a scandal attached to her name. She would be homeless, penniless, unable to care for her mother, Miss Hartley. The Earl's voice cut through her spiraling panic. He had moved closer and was looking down at her with an expression she could not read. "Miss Hartley, try to breathe." "I can't. I didn't, please. You must believe me. I never intended—" "I believe you." The words were so unexpected that they stopped her mid-sentence. She looked up at him, searching his face for mockery or doubt, and found neither. Only a grim resignation, and beneath it, something that might have been sympathy. "I watched you enter the ballroom," he said quietly. "I saw your face when people began to stare. You were frightened and confused, not triumphant. A fortune hunter would have looked very different." Then you can tell them. You can explain that it was a mistake, that I didn't know, and destroy what little remains of your reputation?" He shook his head. "If I publicly denounce you as a fortune hunter, which is what society will assume if I deny the engagement, you will never recover. No one will believe it was an innocent mistake. They will say you schemed and failed, that I saw through your manipulations and rejected you. Your position with Lady Meredith will certainly be terminated. Your future prospects will be non-existent. But if you don't deny it, then we are engaged." His mouth twisted in something that was not quite a smile. For the moment, at least. The Dowager had been watching this exchange with growing distress. Now she stepped forward, her expression a complicated mix of guilt and hope. "Marcus, perhaps this is fate. The girl seems perfectly respectable, and you must marry eventually. If society already believes you are engaged—" "Mother," the single word carried enough warning to stop even the Dowager Countess in her tracks. "We will discuss this later. For now, I need to speak with Miss Hartley privately." "But privately." The Dowager pressed her lips together in a thin line, but she nodded and swept toward the door. At the threshold she paused and looked back at Evangeline with something approaching kindness. "I am sorry, my dear. I never meant to cause you distress. But please believe me when I say that my son is not the cold creature society believes him to be. There are far worse fates than being his countess." Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with things unsaid. Evangeline stared at the fire, unable to look at the Earl, unable to think clearly through the fog of shock and fear that had settled over her mind. "Miss Hartley." His voice was closer now. She looked up to find he had taken the chair across from her. His long legs stretched toward the fire, his grey eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to flee. "We must discuss what is to be done." "What is to be done?" She laughed, and the sound was high and brittle, nothing like her normal voice. "My lord, there is nothing to be done. My life is ruined. My reputation is destroyed. I may as well have thrown myself into the Thames as worn this gown tonight. Your flair for the dramatic is impressive, if unhelpful." His tone was dry but not unkind. "The situation is serious, I grant you, but it is not hopeless." "How can it not be hopeless? Everyone believes we are engaged. When they learn we are not, they will not learn we are not. Not tonight, at any rate." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes holding hers. "I propose a temporary arrangement. For the duration of this house party, 3 days, we will act as though the engagement is real. We will dance together, take meals together, present a united front to society. And while we do so, we will work together to devise a way to end the engagement quietly, without destroying either of our reputations. You would do that? She could not keep the disbelief from her voice. You would pretend to be engaged to a penniless companion you have never met, simply to protect my reputation? I would do that to protect my own peace. His mouth quirked in something that was almost a smile. If I denounce you publicly, I will spend the rest of the season, and likely the rest of my life, explaining myself to every gossip and busybody in London. I will be painted as either a heartless villain who destroyed an innocent woman, or a fool who was nearly trapped by a fortune hunter. Neither narrative appeals to me. So this is about you. It is about both of us. We are both victims of an unfortunate coincidence, Miss Hartley. I see no reason we should not be allies rather than adversaries. It made sense. Evangeline hated that it made sense. She wanted to refuse, to cling to her pride and her independence and her certainty that she needed nothing from anyone, least of all a cold, arrogant earl who looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. But she could not afford pride. She never could. 3 days, she said slowly. And then? And then we devise a story that allows us both to emerge with our dignity intact. Perhaps we will discover we do not suit. Perhaps pressing family matters will call you back to London. Perhaps I will discover that you are secretly a monster and flee in terror. That startled a genuine laugh from him, a short, surprised sound that transformed his face entirely. For a moment, the stone earl vanished, replaced by someone younger and warmer and achingly human. Perhaps that, he agreed, though I would ask that you wait until after the new year to reveal my monstrous nature. I have a reputation to maintain. Despite everything, Evangeline felt her lips twitch. A reputation as a cold, unfeeling automaton who has never smiled in his life? Precisely. It has taken years to cultivate. I would hate to see it ruined by an ill-timed display of good humor. They looked at each other across the firelit space, and something passed between them. Not warmth, exactly, but perhaps the first tentative threads of understanding. He was not what she had expected. She suspected she was not what he had expected either. Very well, she said at last. 3 days. I will play the blushing bride-to-be if you will play the besotted fiancé. I will do my best, though I should warn you that besottedness is not my strong suit. I had gathered that, my lord. Marcus. He rose from his chair and extended a hand to help her rise. If we are to be engaged, you should call me by my name. His hand was warm and strong, and when she placed her gloved fingers in his palm, she felt a jolt of awareness that startled her. She ignored it, as she ignored all inconvenient feelings, and rose to her feet. Marcus, then. And you may call me Evangeline. Evangeline? Her name sounded different in his voice, softer, somehow, and more significant. We should return to the ballroom. My mother will have spread the news of our engagement to everyone by now, and it would look strange if we did not appear together. Must we? The thought of facing 300 staring guests made her stomach clench. I am afraid we must, but I will stay by your side. No one will dare say anything untoward to the future Countess of Thornfield. The words were meant to be reassuring, but they landed like stones in Evangeline's chest. The future Countess of Thornfield. A title she would never hold, a position she could never fill, a dream she had abandoned years ago when she learned that dreams were luxuries the poor could not afford. Come, Marcus said, offering his arm. Let us face the wolves together. Evangeline placed her hand on his arm, felt the solid strength of him beneath the fine wool of his coat, and allowed herself to be led toward the door. The ballroom was even worse than she had feared. The moment they appeared in the doorway, a hush fell over the crowd. 300 pairs of eyes turned toward them, 300 faces arranged in expressions ranging from curiosity to envy to barely concealed hostility. The orchestra continued to play, but no one was dancing. Everyone was watching. Then the Dowager Countess appeared at their side, her smile fixed and brilliant. "There you are, my dears. I was just telling Lady Jersey how delightfully sudden your courtship was. She is positively desperate to hear the details." "I am sure she is," Marcus murmured, his voice carrying only to Evangeline's ears. "My mother has never met a social situation she could not make more complicated." Before Evangeline could respond, the Dowager was steering them toward a cluster of elegantly dressed women who regarded Evangeline with the barely concealed predatory interest of cats watching a particularly foolish mouse. Lady Jersey. Evangeline recognized her from descriptions. One of the fearsome patronesses of Almack's looked her up and down with an assessing gaze that seemed to catalogue every flaw. "So this is the mysterious Miss Hartley," Lady Jersey said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent ballroom. "I confess, Lord Thornfield, you have surprised us all. We had quite given up hope of ever seeing you wed." "One should never give up hope, Lady Jersey." Marcus's voice was smooth, revealing nothing. "I have simply been waiting for the right woman." "And you found her in a companion?" Lady Jersey's eyebrow rose. "How unconventional." Evangeline felt herself flush. She knew what Lady Jersey was really saying, how unsuitable, how inappropriate, how far beneath you. She waited for Marcus to make some excuse, to explain that Evangeline came from a respectable family, that her father's disgrace was not her fault, that she was more than her current circumstances suggested. Instead, he said simply, "I found her. That is all that matters." Something shifted in Lady Jersey's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. "Well," she said after a moment, "I suppose love is no respecter of social distinctions. I wish you both very happy." It was not quite a blessing, but it was not quite a condemnation either. Evangeline felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and congratulations, and thinly veiled interrogations disguised as polite conversation. Marcus stayed by her side throughout, his hand warm at the small of her back, his presence a shield against the worst of the curiosity seekers. He introduced her to his sister, a sharp-tongued widow named Lady Pemberton, who looked at Evangeline with knowing eyes and said nothing more damning than, "Welcome to the family, such as it is." He guided her through conversations with matrons and debutantes and fortune-hunting mammas, deflecting questions with a skill that spoke to years of practice. And he danced with her. When the orchestra struck up a waltz, Marcus led her onto the floor without asking permission, his hand firm at her waist, his grey eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made it difficult to breathe. "You're doing well," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Better than I expected. I have had practice at performing roles I did not choose. Haven't we all?" His hand tightened briefly at her waist. "I should warn you that my mother has already begun planning a wedding breakfast. She is convinced this is fate and refuses to be dissuaded." "And what do you believe it is?" He was silent for a moment, guiding her through a turn. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "I believe it is a mistake that has forced two strangers into uncomfortable proximity. Beyond that, I have no beliefs and no expectations. I learned long ago that expectations are merely disappointments waiting to happen. That is a bleak philosophy. It is a practical one." He looked down at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Hartley. If we are to be engaged, I should know something of the woman I am supposedly going to marry." "There is little to tell. My father was a gentleman of Hampshire. He gambled away his fortune and his health, and left my mother and me with nothing but debts and a tarnished name. I became a companion to survive. The end. That is not an ending. That is merely where you stopped telling the story." The observation was unexpectedly perceptive, and Evangeline found herself without a ready response. She had spent so long defining herself by what she had lost that she had forgotten there might be more to the tale. "What would you have me say?" she asked finally. "That I dream of more than this? That I once imagined a different life, a husband, a home, children? Such dreams are luxuries, my lord. I cannot afford them." "Marcus," he corrected, "and perhaps you underestimate your resources." Before she could ask what he meant, the music ended and the dance was over. Marcus released her with what might have been reluctance, though surely she was imagining that, and led her from the floor. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea for Moses, and Evangeline saw the way people looked at her now with envy, with curiosity, with a grudging respect that had not been there before. The penniless companion had somehow become the future Countess of Thornfield, and society, whatever its private doubts, was adjusting accordingly. "Miss Hartley?" A small voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked down to find the Earl's niece standing before her, dark curls escaping from their ribbons, small face tilted up with unconcealed curiosity. "Are you really going to marry Uncle Marcus?" "Charlotte." Marcus's voice held a warning, but his expression, when he looked at the child, was soft with affection. "You should be in bed." "I know, but everyone was talking about your fiancée and I wanted to see her." Charlotte's grey eyes, so like her uncle's, examined Evangeline with disconcerting intensity. "She's pretty. Do you like her, Uncle Marcus?" "Charlotte." "It's all right," Evangeline said, surprising herself. She crouched down until she was at the child's level, her white skirts pooling around her. "My name is Evangeline. What's yours?" "Lady Charlotte Ashworth." The girl performed a careful curtsy. "But everyone calls me Charlotte. Do you like dogs? Uncle Marcus says I can have a puppy when I'm older, but I think I'm old enough now, don't you?" "I think dogs are wonderful creatures," Evangeline said solemnly. "And 6 seems a very mature age for puppy ownership." Charlotte beamed. "I knew I would like you. The other ladies Uncle Marcus talks to never want to discuss dogs. They only want to talk about boring things like the weather." "The weather is very boring," Evangeline agreed, "but puppies are endlessly fascinating." Over Charlotte's head, she caught Marcus watching them with an expression she could not quite decipher. It might have been surprise, it might have been something warmer. "Charlotte, it is past your bedtime." A harried-looking woman in the plain dress of a governess appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I am so sorry, my lord. I turned my back for one moment." "It's quite all right, Miss Pence." Marcus's voice was kind, if distracted. "Charlotte, go with Miss Pence. You may see Miss Hartley again tomorrow." "Promise?" Charlotte looked between her uncle and Evangeline with the intensity of a child who has learned that adult promises cannot always be trusted. "I promise," Evangeline said, and something in her chest tightened at the brightness that flooded the little girl's face. Charlotte allowed herself to be led away, looking back over her shoulder until she disappeared into the crowd. Evangeline straightened, suddenly aware that she had just made a promise she might not be able to keep. In 3 days, she would no longer be the Earl's fiancée. She would be nothing more than a failed fortune hunter, a cautionary tale, a woman who had reached too high and been cast down accordingly. And Charlotte would learn once again that adults could not be trusted. "She likes you," Marcus said quietly. "She doesn't like many people. She is a child who has lost both parents. She likes anyone who pays attention to her." "Perhaps." He was watching her with that unreadable expression again. "But she has excellent instincts about people. She refused to speak to the last woman my mother tried to match me with. Said she had mean eyes. Did she? Have mean eyes? Terrible ones, cold as a snake's. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Charlotte saved me from a very unpleasant entanglement that time. I have trusted her judgment ever since. Evangeline did not know what to say to that. She felt suddenly desperately tired, tired of performing, tired of pretending, tired of being someone she was not, in a room full of people who would never accept who she really was. "It is late," she said finally. "If you will excuse me, I should find Lady Meredith. She will want to retire soon." "Of course." Marcus offered his arm to escort her. "I will see you at breakfast tomorrow. We should be seen together as much as possible to maintain the illusion." The illusion. Yes, that was what this was. An illusion, a performance, a lie dressed up in white silk and silver embroidery. In 3 days, it would all be over, and Evangeline would return to her real life, the cramped rooms, the endless worry, the slow suffocation of poverty and dependence. But for now, standing in this glittering ballroom with the Earl of Thornfield's hand warm at her waist and 300 pairs of eyes watching her every move, she could almost pretend that the illusion was real. Almost. She found Lady Meredith still ensconced with her friends, though the old woman's eyes sharpened when she saw Evangeline approaching on the Earl's arm. "So it's true," Lady Meredith said, her voice carrying more than necessary. "My companion has caught the biggest fish in the sea. I always knew that gown would bring good fortune." "Lady Meredith," Marcus's bow was impeccable, "I must thank you for bringing Miss Hartley into my orbit. I am in your debt." "You certainly are." Lady Meredith's eyes glittered with satisfaction. "I expect an invitation to the wedding. Front pew." "You shall have it." The exchange was all lies, of course layers upon layers of deception that made Evangeline's head spin. But she smiled and said the right things, and accepted Lady Meredith's congratulations with appropriate modesty, and if her hands trembled slightly where they were hidden in the folds of her white gown, no one seemed to notice. Finally, mercifully, the evening came to an end. Guests began drifting toward their chambers, and Evangeline found herself being escorted to a room in the family wing, a room far grander than anything she had expected, with silk wallpaper and a 4-poster bed, and a fire already burning in the grate. "The future Countess of Thornfield cannot sleep in the servants' quarters," the Dowager explained, her smile warm if somewhat nervous. "I hope you will be comfortable here, my dear." "It's beautiful," Evangeline managed. "Thank you, my lady." "Please call me Margaret. We are to be family after all." The Dowager patted her hand. "I know this has all been very sudden. But I have a good feeling about you, Miss Hartley. A very good feeling indeed." Then she was gone, and Evangeline was alone in a room fit for a countess, wearing a gown that had ruined her life, wondering how she had gone from invisible companion to engaged woman in the space of a single evening. She crossed to the window and looked out at the snow-covered grounds of Thornfield Manor, silver in the moonlight. Somewhere in this vast house, Marcus Ashworth was preparing for bed, probably cursing the fate that had thrown them together. Somewhere, a little girl named Charlotte was dreaming of puppies and new aunts. Somewhere, 300 guests were whispering about the mysterious Miss Hartley who had somehow captured the Stone Earl's heart. And here stood Evangeline, caught between the life she had known and the life she was pretending to want, unable to see a way forward that did not end in disaster. 3 days. She had 3 days to play the part of a woman in love. 3 days to pretend that happiness was possible. 3 days before the illusion shattered and reality came crashing back. 3 days to remember that wanting things only led to heartbreak. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes, and if a single tear escaped to trace down her cheek, there was no one there to see it. Morning arrived with pale winter light filtering through unfamiliar curtains, and for a moment Evangeline did not know where she was. The bed was too soft, the sheets too fine, the room too warm. Then memory crashed over her like a wave. The white gown, the staring eyes, the impossible engagement, and she pressed her face into the pillow with a groan. It had not been a dream. She was still at Thornfield Manor, still pretending to be engaged to a man she had met only hours before, still trapped in a web of circumstance and tradition that tightened around her with every passing moment. A knock at the door brought her bolt upright. Before she could speak, a maid entered carrying a breakfast tray, chocolate and toast and hothouse fruit, more food than Evangeline typically ate in a day. "Good morning, miss." The maid bobbed a curtsy. "His lordship's compliments, and he hopes you slept well. He asks if you might join him in the morning room at 10 o'clock. "Thank you." Evangeline's voice came out rusty with sleep. "What time is it now?" 8:30, miss. Shall I help you dress?" The question reminded Evangeline that she had no clothes suitable for a house party. She had packed only enough for a companion plain day dresses in serviceable colours, nothing that would mark her as anything other than what she was. But she was no longer what she was. She was the future Countess of Thornfield, and the future Countess of Thornfield could not appear at breakfast in darned grey wool. "I have nothing appropriate to wear," she admitted, hating the way the words tasted in her mouth. "My wardrobe is limited." The maid's expression did not change. "Her ladyship anticipated that, miss. She has sent several gowns from her own collection from when she was younger, you understand. She says they should fit well enough until the dressmaker can be summoned from the village." Of course the dowager had anticipated it. Of course Evangeline was to be dressed in borrowed finery, a doll clothed by her betters, unable even to maintain the dignity of wearing her own clothes. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. But what choice did she have? She could not refuse the gowns without raising questions, without revealing that she was not the eager bride everyone believed her to be. And so she nodded and allowed the maid to help her into a morning dress of soft blue wool that was finer than anything she had worn since her father's death. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger, elegant, composed, every inch the future countess. Only Evangeline could see the fear that lurked behind her eyes, the desperate uncertainty that no borrowed gown could disguise. At precisely 10 o'clock, she made her way to the morning room. Marcus was already there, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in his hand, his dark hair slightly dishevelled, as if he had been running his fingers through it. He turned when she entered, and something flickered in his grey eyes. Appreciation, perhaps, or surprise at her transformation. "The blue suits you," he said by way of greeting. "Better than the white. The white nearly destroyed my life. I imagine most colours would be an improvement." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You are sharp-tongued in the morning. I shall have to remember that. I am sharp-tongued at all hours. It is one of my few remaining pleasures." He set down his coffee and gestured to a chair near the fire. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss before the other guests descend." Evangeline sat, arranging her borrowed skirts with the care of one who is acutely aware that everything she wears belongs to someone else. Marcus took the chair across from her, close enough that she could see the faint shadows under his eyes. He had not slept well either, it seemed. "First," he said, "we must establish our story. How did we meet? How long have we been courting? Why the secrecy? These are questions we will be asked repeatedly over the next 3 days, and our answers must be consistent. Surely the simplest lie is the one closest to the truth. We met through Lady Meredith, who is an acquaintance of your mother's. We were introduced at some previous event, a musicale perhaps, or a private dinner. Our courtship has been brief but intense, conducted largely through letters due to the impropriety of more frequent meetings. And the secrecy? I have no fortune, no connections, nothing to recommend me as a bride for an earl. We kept our attachment private because we knew society would disapprove. The white gown was my way of forcing your hand of declaring publicly what we had only whispered privately. Marcus considered this, his grey eyes thoughtful. It has the virtue of explaining both the suddenness of the engagement and your unconventional circumstances, but it paints you as somewhat calculating. Is that the image you wish to present? I am a woman who wore white to an earl's ball. Society already believes me calculating. Better to own the narrative than to let others control it. You are more strategic than I expected. Survival requires strategy, my lord. I have had 3 years to learn that lesson. Something shifted in his expression. Sympathy, perhaps, or recognition. Marcus, he corrected quietly. And yes, I suppose you have. They spent the next hour refining their story, discussing the details that would make their supposed courtship believable. Evangeline learned that Marcus had attended Lady Harrington's musicale 3 months prior, where they could plausibly have been introduced. She learned that he preferred coffee to tea, that he rose early and retired late, that he had a sister named Helena, who would see through any lie they attempted, and must therefore be told the truth. In return, she told him about her mother's illness consumption, slow but relentless, and the cramped rooms in London where they lived on the edge of poverty. She told him about the endless parade of employers, each position slightly worse than the last, each departure another step down the ladder she had once climbed with such confidence. She told him more than she had intended to tell anyone, drawn out by his quiet questions and his lack of judgment. "You have been carrying a great deal on your shoulders," he said when she fell silent. "It is no wonder they seem so tense." I was not aware my shoulders were under observation. I notice things. It is another of my unfortunate habits. He rose and moved to the sideboard, pouring her a cup of chocolate without asking if she wanted it. "You should eat something before the others arrive. The house party guests are circling like sharks who have scented blood. You will need your strength." Charming imagery. I find honesty more useful than charm. He handed her the cup, his fingers brushing hers in a way that sent an unexpected spark up her arm. "The matrons will interrogate you about your family, your education, your accomplishments. The young ladies will attempt to undermine your confidence with subtle insults disguised as compliments. The gentlemen will try to determine if you are as clever as you seem, or merely fortunate. And what will you do? I will stay close enough to intervene if necessary, but not so close as to seem possessive." He returned to his chair, his long legs stretched toward the fire. "We must strike a balance between devoted and dignified. Too much affection will seem false given my reputation. Too little will raise questions about the legitimacy of the engagement. You have given this a great deal of thought. I have spent 7 years watching society dissect my every action, looking for signs of weakness or vulnerability. I have learned to think several moves ahead." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The vultures descended the moment my brother's betrayal became public knowledge. They have never entirely left." Evangeline studied him over the rim of her cup. In the morning light, without the protective armor of evening dress and ballroom formality, he seemed younger somehow, more human. The cold mask he wore in public had slipped slightly, revealing glimpses of the man beneath wounded, wary, but not entirely without warmth. "May I ask you something?" she said. "You may ask. I cannot promise to answer. Your brother, and your former betrothed, what happened to them?" The silence that followed was long enough that Evangeline thought he would not respond. She watched emotions flicker across his face. Pain, anger, something that might have been grief before he brought them under control with visible effort. "Edmund was 2 years younger than me," he said finally. "We were close as boys. I thought I knew him better than anyone." His voice was flat, carefully stripped of feeling. "When I became engaged to Sophia Whitmore, Edmund was the first person I told. He seemed happy for me. He was my groomsman, my confidant, my brother in every sense that mattered. And then, 1 week before our wedding, I returned from a trip to London to find that they had fled together. A note was left on my pillow. Edmund apologized for the pain he knew he was causing, but claimed that he and Sophia had fallen in love and could not bear to live without each other. They were married in Scotland the following day. Evangeline felt the words like a blow to her own chest. To be betrayed so completely, by the two people one trusted most, she could not imagine the devastation that must have followed. What happened to them? They went abroad, Italy first, then Greece, then various other places I stopped tracking. Edmund had a small inheritance from our grandmother, enough to live on if they were careful, but they were not careful. Sophia was accustomed to luxury, and Edmund was determined to provide it. Marcus's mouth twisted. He gambled. He borrowed. He drank himself into an early grave within 2 years of the wedding. And Sophia? Died in childbirth 6 months later. Charlotte was born healthy, but Sophia did not survive the night. He looked toward the window, his profile hard as carved stone. My father's solicitors found Charlotte in a rented room in Naples, being cared for by a local woman who had not been paid in months. She was 18 months old and did not speak a single word of English. Evangeline's throat tightened. She thought of Charlotte's bright eyes, her eager questions, her desperate need for connection. That child had known abandonment before she could even understand the word. "You brought her here," she said softly. "I brought her here." Marcus turned back to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "She is not my daughter. She is the child of the brother who betrayed me and the woman who chose him over me. By every logic, I should despise her. But you don't. She is innocent. Whatever sins her parents committed, Charlotte bears no responsibility for them. And she is family. The only family I have left, apart from my mother and sister." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Evangeline understood something she had not understood before. Marcus Ashworth had not closed himself off from love because he was cold or heartless. He had closed himself off because he had loved too much and been destroyed by it. The walls he had built were not defenses against feeling, but against the devastation that feeling could bring. "You are a good man," she said quietly. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or disbelief. "You barely know me. I know that you took in your brother's child when you could have left her in Naples. I know that you chose to protect my reputation when you could have denounced me as a fortune hunter. I know that you speak to Charlotte with genuine affection, and that your servants look at you with respect rather than fear." She met his gaze steadily. "I have spent 3 years observing people, Marcus. I have learned to see past their masks. And what I see when I look at you is not coldness. It is pain." The silence that followed was charged with something Evangeline could not name. Marcus stared at her, as if she had spoken in a foreign language, as if her words had unlocked something he had kept carefully hidden. Then a noise in the corridor broke the spell, and his mask slipped back into place. "The guests are stirring," he said, rising from his chair. "We should prepare to face them." Evangeline rose as well, smoothing her borrowed skirts with hands that trembled slightly. Whatever had passed between them in that moment, whatever wall had briefly crumbled, was now firmly back in place. They were strangers again, partners in a deception, nothing more. But as Marcus offered his arm to escort her to the breakfast room, she could not help but wonder what might happen if those walls came down for good. The breakfast room was chaos, dressed in elegance. 20 guests milled about a massive sideboard, laden with enough food to feed a small army, their conversations creating a wall of sound that hit Evangeline the moment she entered. The noise faltered when she and Marcus appeared in the doorway, a ripple of silence that spread outward like a stone dropped in water. Then, With almost mechanical precision, everyone resumed their conversations, though Evangeline could feel the weight of their attention like a physical pressure against her skin. "Smile," Marcus murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. "You look as though you are walking to your own execution." The sensation is remarkably similar. Courage. The first hour is always the worst. He guided her to the sideboard, filling a plate with foods she did not want and could not imagine eating. Around them, other guests made a show of selecting their own breakfasts, while casting sidelong glances at the newly engaged couple. Evangeline caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Companion, can you imagine? No fortune whatsoever. The dowager must be beside herself," and felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "Ignore them." Marcus's voice was pitched for her ears alone. "They are jealous and petty, and not worth a moment of your attention. Easy for you to say. You are not the one being discussed. I have been discussed for 7 years. One develops a thick skin." He steered her toward a table in the corner, away from the worst of the gossipers. "Besides, they are not saying anything that is not true. You are a companion. You do not have a fortune. These are facts, not insults. The way they say them makes them insults. Then choose not to be insulted." He pulled out her chair with unexpected gallantry. "Your worth is not determined by their opinions, Evangeline. Remember that." She looked up at him, startled by the use of her name, by the unexpected kindness in his voice. For a moment, the mask slipped again, and she saw something warm flickering in his grey eyes. Then, Lady Helena Pemberton descended upon them like a well-dressed storm. "Brother," Helena kissed Marcus's cheek with the efficiency of long practice. "You have made quite a mess of things, haven't you? The entire house is buzzing with gossip, and Mother is planning a wedding breakfast despite my repeated assurances that this engagement will not survive the week." "Helena." "Don't Helena me. I know perfectly well what happened last night. Mother may be blind to anything she does not wish to see, but I am not." Helena turned her sharp gaze on Evangeline, and for a moment Evangeline felt like a butterfly pinned to a board. "Miss Hartley, I understand you found yourself accidentally engaged to my brother through a series of unfortunate coincidences involving a borrowed gown and a family tradition no one bothered to explain to you." Evangeline's mouth opened, but no words came out. Marcus had said his sister would see through any lie, but she had not expected the woman to be quite so direct. Yes, she managed finally. "That is an accurate summary." "Excellent. Honesty is refreshing." Helena settled into the chair beside Evangeline with the grace of a woman accustomed to dominating any space she occupied. "I despise dishonesty, Miss Hartley. It gives me headaches. So let us be clear with one another. I know this engagement is a sham. I know you are not in love with my brother and he is not in love with you. I know that you are both merely trying to survive the next 3 days without destroying your respective reputations." "Helena, this is not the place," Marcus began. "The place is wherever I choose to make it." Helena silenced him with a look. "What I wish to know, Miss Hartley, is what you intend to do about my niece." "Charlotte?" Evangeline blinked in confusion. "What about her?" "She has taken a liking to you, a significant liking, from what I observed last night. Charlotte does not form attachments easily. She has learned through bitter experience that people disappear without warning, and she has chosen to attach herself to you." Helena's eyes were hard, but something vulnerable flickered beneath the surface. "In 3 days, when this farce is over, you will disappear from her life. She will believe, as she has believed before, that she has been abandoned by someone she trusted." The words landed like blows. Evangeline thought of Charlotte's bright eyes, her eager questions, her desperate need for approval. She thought of how the child had made her promise that she would see her again. "I did not intend to hurt her," Evangeline said quietly. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Intent is irrelevant. What matters is the outcome." Helena's voice softened slightly. "I am not blaming you, Miss Hartley. You are as much a victim of circumstance as anyone. But Charlotte is 6 years old, and she has already lost more than any child should have to lose. I will not stand by and watch her lose again." "What would you have me do?" "I would have you be careful with her heart. Be kind, but do not make promises you cannot keep. Do not let her believe in a future that will not come to pass." Helena paused, her expression unreadable. "And if, by some miracle, you find yourself in a position to keep those promises, keep them. Charlotte needs stability more than she needs anything else in this world." Evangeline met Helena's gaze steadily. "I understand." "I hope you do." Helena rose from her chair with fluid grace. "Now, if you will excuse me, I must prevent our mother from ordering an ice sculpture for the wedding breakfast. She has convinced herself that swans are romantic." She swept away, leaving Evangeline and Marcus in a pocket of silence, surrounded by the chaos of breakfast. "My sister," Marcus said dryly, "is not known for her subtlety. She loves Charlotte. Fiercely. Helena lost her own child a stillbirth 5 years ago and has never recovered from the grief. Charlotte gives her someone to protect, someone to mother, even if only from a distance." Evangeline's heart ached for the pain hidden beneath Helena's sharp exterior. Another wound, another wall, another person using strength as armor against a world that had hurt them too many times. "Your family," she said slowly, "has known a great deal of loss. Loss is the price of love." Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes betrayed something deeper. "The Ashworths love intensely, and we lose just as intensely. It is our curse and our blessing." Before Evangeline could respond, a small voice interrupted them. "Miss Hartley!" Charlotte appeared at her elbow, still in her nightgown and wrapper, her dark curls tangled from sleep. Her governess, Miss Pence, trailed behind, looking harried and apologetic. "Lady Charlotte, you cannot be here in your nightclothes." "But Miss Hartley promised she would see me today, and I wanted to make sure she didn't forget." Charlotte's grey eyes fixed on Evangeline with heartbreaking intensity. "You didn't forget, did you?" Evangeline looked at this child, this lonely, wounded child, who had learned too young that love was unreliable, and felt something shift in her chest. Helena's warnings echoed in her mind, but she could not bring herself to push Charlotte away. "I didn't forget," she said softly. "But you should go with Miss Pence now and get dressed. I will come find you later, and we can do something together." "Would you like that?" "What kind of something? What would you like to do?" Charlotte considered this with the gravity of a child making a momentous decision. "Could we build a snowman? Miss Pence says I'm too young, but I'm not. I'm very mature for my age. Uncle Marcus says so." Evangeline glanced at Marcus, who raised an eyebrow but did not contradict his niece. "I think a snowman sounds perfect. After luncheon we will bundle up and go outside, but only if you eat your breakfast and let Miss Pence brush your hair properly." "I will, I promise." Charlotte threw her arms around Evangeline in a fierce hug that lasted only a moment, but left Evangeline breathless. Then she was gone, dragged away by a relieved Miss Pence, her chatter fading as she disappeared down the corridor. "You should not have promised her that," Marcus said quietly. "I know." Evangeline stared at the doorway where Charlotte had vanished. "But I could not help it. She has that effect on people." He paused. "She reminds me of Edmund sometimes. Before everything went wrong, he had the same way of looking at you as if you held all the answers to all the questions in the world. That is a heavy weight to carry." "Yes." His voice was soft. It is. The morning passed in a blur of social obligations. Evangeline was introduced to a parade of guests whose names she struggled to remember, each interaction a minefield of potential humiliation. She smiled until her face ached, deflected questions with practiced vagueness, and clung to Marcus's presence like a drowning woman to a lifeline. Through it all, she found herself watching him. The way he adjusted his stance to shield her from the most aggressive gossips, the way his hand found the small of her back when she seemed overwhelmed, the way he redirected conversations that veered too close to sensitive topics with a skill that spoke to years of practice. He was protecting her, she realized. Not because he cared for her, they were strangers after all, but because he had promised to, and Marcus Ashworth was a man who kept his promises. The revelation should not have meant anything. It should not have made her heart beat faster, or her cheeks flush with warmth. But it did, and the knowledge unsettled her more than she cared to admit. After luncheon, true to her word, Evangeline collected Charlotte and made her way to the snow-covered gardens. The air was sharp and cold, the sky a pale grey that promised more snow before evening. Charlotte bounced ahead, her excitement barely contained within her small body. "We need to find the best snow," Charlotte announced with the authority of a seasoned expert. "Not too wet and not too dry, and we need sticks for arms and stones for eyes and a carrot for a nose." "You have done this before?" "Miss Pence took me once, but she got cold and made me go inside before we finished. The snowman only had one arm." Charlotte's face fell at the memory. "He looked very sad." "Then we shall make certain this snowman has 2 arms and is very happy indeed." They found a patch of snow that met Charlotte's exacting standards and began to roll the base of their creation. The work was harder than Evangeline remembered she had built snowmen as a child, in the before times, when happiness was simple and the future stretched ahead without shadows, but Charlotte's enthusiasm was infectious. "Miss Hartley?" Charlotte patted the snow with her mittened hands. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Are you going to marry Uncle Marcus?" The question, so direct and innocent, stopped Evangeline mid-motion. She looked at Charlotte's upturned face, saw the hope warring with fear in those grey eyes, and felt her heart clench. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Sometimes grown-ups think they are going to do something, and then circumstances change, and they end up doing something different. Like my mama and papa." Charlotte's voice was matter-of-fact, but something wounded flickered beneath the surface. "They were going to come back for me, but then they didn't." "Charlotte." Evangeline knelt in the snow, heedless of her borrowed dress. "What happened to your parents was not your fault. They loved you very much." "How do you know? You never met them." "Because anyone who met you would love you. It's impossible not to." Charlotte studied her with the unnerving perceptiveness of childhood. "Uncle Marcus says love is dangerous. He says it makes people do foolish things." "Your uncle?" Evangeline hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Your uncle has been hurt very badly by love. When someone hurts you, it's natural to want to protect yourself from being hurt again. But that doesn't mean love itself is bad. It just means we have to be careful with it." "Are you going to hurt Uncle Marcus?" The question was so unexpected that Evangeline could not immediately respond. She thought of Marcus, his walls, his wounds, his careful distance from anything that might touch his heart. She thought of the way he looked at Charlotte, the softness he could not quite hide. "I would never hurt your uncle on purpose," she said finally. "But sometimes people hurt each other without meaning to, Charlotte. That's part of being human." Charlotte considered this with the gravity of a judge delivering a verdict. "I think you should marry him," she said at last. "He needs someone to make him smile. He doesn't smile enough." Look! I found sticks for arms!" The moment passed as Charlotte bounded away to collect her treasures. Evangeline remained kneeling in the snow, her borrowed dress soaked through, her heart aching with an emotion she could not name. This was dangerous. All of it. Charlotte's attachment, her own growing fascination with Marcus, the way this borrowed life was beginning to feel almost real. In 3 days, she would leave Thornfield Manor and return to her cramped rooms in London, to her sick mother and her endless worries and her careful, colourless existence. This was a fantasy, nothing more, and fantasies always ended in disappointment. But as Charlotte returned with her sticks and stones, her cheeks flushed with cold and her eyes bright with joy, Evangeline found herself unable to care about the inevitable ending. For this moment, in this snow-covered garden, with this child who had somehow claimed a piece of her heart, she would allow herself to pretend. They built their snowman with 2 arms and a lopsided smile, and when Charlotte declared it the finest snowman in all of England, Evangeline did not disagree. The evening brought a new round of social obligations, a formal dinner followed by games in the drawing room. Evangeline endured both with growing exhaustion, her social mask slipping more with each passing hour. By the time the guests began to drift toward the card tables, she wanted nothing more than to escape to her borrowed chamber and sleep for a week. But Marcus appeared at her side before she could make her escape. "Walk with me," he said quietly. "I find I need air, and you look as though you could use the same." She followed him through a series of corridors she did not recognize, until they emerged onto a covered terrace overlooking the darkened gardens. The snow had begun to fall again, drifting lazily through the lamplight, and the cold was sharp enough to make her breath fog. "Better?" he asked. "Much." She leaned against the stone balustrade, letting the cold air clear her head. "I had forgotten how exhausting society could be. 3 years as a companion has made me soft. You have done remarkably well, better than many women born to this life. I was born to this life, once, before my father destroyed everything, and yet you survived." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body through her dress. "That is no small thing. Survival is not the same as living." "No." His voice was soft. "It is not." They stood in silence, watching the snow fall. Evangeline was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his breath clouded in the cold air, the faint scent of cedar and smoke that she had noticed the night before. "Charlotte told me something today," she said finally. "She said you told her love is dangerous." Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. "It is. Love makes us vulnerable. It gives others the power to destroy us." "Is that what your brother's betrayal taught you?" "Among other things." He turned to face her, his grey eyes unreadable in the darkness. "I loved Sophia. Not passionately, perhaps, but genuinely. I believed we would build a life together, raise children, grow old in each other's company. When she chose Edmund instead, when they fled together without even the courtesy of a goodbye..." He stopped, his jaw tight. "It broke something in you," Evangeline said quietly. "It broke everything. My trust, my faith, my belief that I could know another person's heart." He laughed. But there was no humor in the sound. "I was so certain of Sophia's affection. I would have staked my life on her fidelity. And yet she left me without a backward glance, for a man I thought I knew better than anyone." "So you decided never to trust again?" "I decided that trust was a luxury I could not afford. Better to remain cold and distant than to risk such devastation again." "And has it worked? Has the coldness protected you?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked out at the falling snow, his profile hard as carved marble. "It protected me from further betrayal," he said finally. But it also—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Also what?" "It also left me hollow." The words seemed dragged from somewhere deep within him. "I have spent 7 years feeling nothing. No joy, no hope, no connection. I go through the motions of living without actually being alive. I am not cold because I do not feel I am cold, because I am afraid of what I might feel if I allow myself." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Evangeline understood then what Helena had meant about the Ashworths loving intensely. Marcus was not cold by nature. He was cold by choice, by necessity, by the desperate need to protect himself from a pain that had nearly destroyed him. "That sounds exhausting," she said softly. "It is." He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "And lately, it has been getting harder." "Harder?" "To maintain the walls, to remember why I built them." He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "You are unexpected, Evangeline. I thought I had mastered the art of keeping people at a distance, but you seem to slip through every defense I have." Her heart was pounding now, so loud she was certain he must hear it. "I am not trying to—" "I know. That is what makes it so disconcerting." He reached out, almost hesitantly, and brushed a snowflake from her hair. "You are kind and clever, and far stronger than you give yourself credit for. You care about Charlotte without any ulterior motive, simply because she needs caring for. You look at me and see, not the Earl of Thornfield, not the Stone Earl, not the fool who was betrayed by his own brother. You see something else entirely. What do I see? I was hoping you would tell me." The words were barely above a whisper, and they were close now, close enough that Evangeline could see the pulse beating in his throat, could feel the warmth of his breath against her cold cheek. "I see a man," she said slowly, "who has been wounded so deeply that he no longer believes in healing, who has built walls so high that he has forgotten what it feels like to be touched, who loves his niece and his sister and his mother with a fierceness he tries desperately to hide." She met his eyes. "I see someone who is afraid, just like me." Something flickered in his gaze, recognition perhaps, or relief. "And what are you afraid of, Evangeline Hartley?" "Everything." The word came out before she could stop it. "Wanting things, hoping for things, believing that happiness might be possible when every experience of my life has taught me otherwise." "We are a matched pair, then." His voice was rough. "Both too afraid to reach for what we want." "And what do you want?" The question hung between them, dangerous and electric. Marcus's hand was still in her hair, his fingers gentle against her scalp. She could see the war playing out on his face, desire against fear, hope against caution, the desperate need for connection against the terrible knowledge of what connection could cost. She should step back. She should remind him that this was all pretense, that in 2 days she would leave and they would never see each other again. She should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak that awaited if she allowed herself to feel. But she was tired of protecting herself, tired of building walls and maintaining distance and pretending she did not want the very things she had convinced herself she could not have. "Marcus," he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss, not a tentative exploration of possibility. It was desperate and hungry and raw, 7 years of loneliness and longing poured into a single moment of contact. His hands cupped her face, his body pressed against hers, and she found herself responding with an intensity that shocked her. She had been kissed before once, by a young man who had courted her briefly before her father's disgrace, a chaste brush of lips that had made her feel nothing. This was different. This was fire and hunger, and a need so profound it frightened her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. The snow was falling thick around them. "That was," he began, "Miss Hartley, Lord Thornfield." The voice shattered the moment like glass. They sprang apart as Miss Pence appeared in the doorway to the terrace, her face white with distress. "It's Lady Charlotte," she gasped. "She's taken ill. A fever, it came on so suddenly." Marcus was moving before she finished speaking, his face transformed with fear. Evangeline followed, her heart pounding, the kiss already fading into unreality. Charlotte's chamber was bright with lamplight and heavy with the smell of illness. The child lay small and pale against her pillows, her dark hair matted with sweat, her eyes glassy with fever. The dowager was already there, wringing her hands, and Helena stood by the window looking more frightened than Evangeline had ever seen her. "The physician has been sent for," Helena said, her voice strained. "But the roads are treacherous, and he may not arrive for hours." Marcus knelt by Charlotte's bedside, taking her small hand in his. "Charlotte, Charlotte, can you hear me?" Charlotte's eyes fluttered open. "Uncle Marcus?" Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "I don't feel well." "I know, sweetheart. You're going to be all right. The doctor is coming." "Miss Hartley?" Charlotte's gaze found Evangeline hovering in the doorway. "You came." "Of course I came." Evangeline moved to the bedside, her throat tight with fear. "I promised, didn't I?" "Stay with me?" Charlotte's hand reached for hers, small and burning hot. "Please." Evangeline looked at Marcus, saw the terror barely contained behind his eyes, and made her decision. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I'll stay right here until you feel better." The night that followed was the longest of Evangeline's life. The physician arrived near midnight, examined Charlotte with grim efficiency, and pronounced it a severe fever, dangerous, but not necessarily deadly if the child was carefully tended. "Cool cloths for the fever," he instructed. "Keep her hydrated. Watch for any signs of the condition worsening, and pray." Marcus refused to leave Charlotte's side. He held her hand through the worst of the fever, murmured stories when she grew restless, sang half-remembered lullabies when she cried out in her sleep. The cold, distant Earl had vanished entirely, replaced by a man who loved this child so fiercely that his fear was palpable. Evangeline stayed too. She fetched fresh cloths when the old ones grew warm, brought tea that went cold and untouched, held Charlotte's other hand when the child's grip tightened with pain. She watched Marcus across the bed, saw the devotion written plain on his face, and felt something fundamental shift in her heart. Near dawn, the fever broke. Charlotte's eyes opened, clear for the first time in hours, and she looked between her uncle and Evangeline with confusion. "Why are you crying, Uncle Marcus?" Marcus laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. "Because you scared me, little one. You scared me very badly." "I'm sorry." Charlotte's voice was still weak, but the terrible glassy quality was gone. "I didn't mean to." "I know you didn't." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Go back to sleep now. You need to rest." Charlotte's eyes were already closing. "Miss Hartley?" "Yes?" "Don't leave." The words were barely audible. "Don't leave us." Evangeline looked at Marcus over Charlotte's small form. His face was ravaged by the night's terror, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted, but something burned in them that she had never seen before. "I won't," she whispered. "I promise." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they could not be true. In 2 days, she would have to leave. She would have to return to her real life and leave this borrowed one behind. The kiss on the terrace seemed like something from a dream. Whatever had passed between them, whatever might have been possible, had been swallowed by the crisis of Charlotte's illness. And yet, Marcus's eyes held hers across the bed, and in them she saw everything he could not say: gratitude, wonder, and something deeper that she was afraid to name. 2 days. She had 2 days left, and she had no idea what would happen when they were over. Dawn light filtered through Charlotte's curtains, painting the room in shades of pearl and rose. Evangeline sat slumped in the chair beside the bed, her borrowed dress hopelessly wrinkled, her hair escaping its pins in wild tendrils. She had not slept, none of them had, but the exhaustion felt distant, muffled by the overwhelming relief of watching Charlotte's chest rise and fall in peaceful, healthy rhythm. The child slept deeply now, her small face relaxed, the terrifying flush of fever replaced by natural colour. The physician had returned at first light to confirm what they already knew. The worst had passed. Charlotte would recover fully with rest and care. Marcus had finally allowed himself to be persuaded to sleep, though it had taken Helena's forceful intervention to make him leave Charlotte's side. He had looked at Evangeline before he went, his eyes saying things his mouth could not form, and the intensity of that gaze had stayed with her through the quiet hours of the morning watch. "Miss Hartley," Evangeline started. She had not heard the door open, had not noticed the Dowager Countess slip into the room on silent feet. Lady Thornfield moved to stand beside her, looking down at her sleeping granddaughter with an expression of profound relief. "You should rest," the Dowager said quietly. "You have been awake all night." "I didn't want her to wake alone." "No." The Dowager's voice softened. "I don't suppose you did." She was silent for a moment, her aged fingers reaching out to brush a curl from Charlotte's forehead. "You care for her. Genuinely care, I mean. Not merely as a means to secure my son's affection. Charlotte is—" Evangeline searched for words. "She is easy to love, and she has been through so much." "She has. More than any child should bear." The Dowager turned to face Evangeline, her grey eyes so like Marcus's, sharp with assessment. "I owe you an apology, Miss Hartley." "My lady? I assumed when I saw you in that gown that you were another fortune hunter come to trap my son. I was so desperate to see him married, so eager to believe that he had finally chosen someone, that I did not stop to consider the impossibility of the situation. I should have recognized that no true scheme would be so clumsy in its execution. You could not have known. I should have asked." The Dowager's voice was firm. "I should have spoken to you privately before announcing your engagement to the entire ballroom. My eagerness outpaced my judgment, and you have suffered for it." Evangeline did not know what to say. She had expected many things from the Dowager Countess: disapproval, suspicion, perhaps even hostility, but not this candid acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "The situation was unprecedented," she said finally. "You cannot be blamed for believing what the tradition suggested." "Perhaps not, but I can be blamed for perpetuating the deception, for placing you in a position where refusal was impossible." The Dowager paused, her expression growing thoughtful. "I have watched you these past 2 days, Miss Hartley. I have seen how you navigate our world with grace, despite having every reason to despise it. I have seen how you defend Charlotte against the snide comments of small-minded guests. I have seen how you look at my son when you think no one is watching." Evangeline's cheeks flushed. "My lady, and I have seen how he looks at you." The Dowager's voice was gentle now. "Marcus has not looked at anyone that way in 7 years, not since Sophia Whitmore broke his heart and convinced him that love was merely another word for betrayal. Whatever you think you have observed, it is only the illusion we agreed to maintain. Is it?" The Dowager's gaze was penetrating. "Then why did you spend the night at Charlotte's bedside when you could have retreated to your chamber? Why did my son refuse to leave as long as you remained? Why, when I looked in an hour ago, Were you holding hands across my granddaughter's bed, as if the contact was the only thing keeping either of you upright?" Evangeline had no answer. She remembered the moment the dowager spoke of Marcus's hand finding hers in the dark hours before dawn, his fingers intertwining with hers, neither of them speaking because words seemed inadequate to contain what they were feeling. She had told herself it meant nothing, that it was merely the intimacy born of shared fear and shared relief. But she knew, even then, that she was lying to herself. "I do not know what is between your son and me," she said quietly. "I know only that in 2 days I must leave. I have a mother who needs me in London, a position that I have almost certainly lost by agreeing to this charade. Whatever might have developed here, there is no future in it." "Is there not?" The dowager's voice was soft. "My dear girl, do you truly not see what you have done? You have woken something in my son that I feared dead forever. You have given Charlotte hope that she might have a mother figure who will not disappear. You have reminded this family what it feels like to have warmth in our midst." She paused. "And you have done all of this while believing yourself unworthy of the very happiness you have brought to others." Evangeline's throat tightened. "I am not unworthy. I am merely realistic." "You are afraid." The dowager's tone was matter-of-fact. "You have been afraid for so long that you have forgotten any other way of being. But fear is not the same as wisdom, Miss Hartley, and protecting yourself from hope is not the same as protecting yourself from pain." Before Evangeline could respond, a small voice interrupted them. "Aunt Margaret?" Charlotte's eyes had opened, cloudy with sleep, but clear of fever. "Is Miss Hartley still here?" "I'm here." Evangeline leaned forward, taking Charlotte's small hand in hers. "I told you I would stay. I was afraid you would leave while I was sleeping." Charlotte's voice was weak but determined. "Everyone leaves while I'm sleeping." The words struck Evangeline like a physical blow. She thought of everything this child had endured: her parents' abandonment, her subsequent orphaning, the endless parade of governesses and servants who came and went without warning. Charlotte had learned, at an age when most children were learning to read, that love was temporary and people could not be trusted to stay. "I am not going to leave while you're sleeping," Evangeline said, her voice rough with emotion. "I promise." "But you are going to leave." Charlotte's grey eyes, so like her uncle's, held an understanding far beyond her years. "Everyone says the house party ends tomorrow. That means you'll go back to London and I'll never see you again." "Charlotte, it's all right." Charlotte's voice was small but steady. "I know how it works. Uncle Marcus explained that you weren't really going to marry him, that it was just pretend because of the white dress. He said I shouldn't get too attached because you would have to go away." Evangeline felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Marcus had told Charlotte the truth. He had tried to protect his niece from the inevitable disappointment, had warned her not to hope for something that would not come to pass. It was the right thing to do, the kind thing, the responsible thing, and yet it felt like a knife to the heart. "Charlotte," she said carefully, "whatever happens between your uncle and me, I want you to know that I have genuinely enjoyed knowing you. You are a wonderful girl, and anyone would be lucky to be part of your family. But you're not going to be part of our family." Charlotte's voice was flat now, the hope draining from her eyes. "I understand. You have to go back to your real life." Evangeline trailed off, unable to find words that would comfort, without making promises she could not keep. The dowager, who had been watching this exchange in silence, cleared her throat. "Charlotte, darling, you need to rest. Miss Hartley will be here when you wake, and we can discuss all of this later when you are feeling stronger. But rest." The dowager's voice was gentle but firm. "Everything will look different once you are well again." Charlotte's eyes fluttered closed, but her grip on Evangeline's hand remained tight. Even in sleep, the child clung to the connection she feared losing. Evangeline sat motionless, watching Charlotte sleep, feeling the weight of the dowager's gaze on her back. She thought about everything that had happened in the past 3 days, the accidental engagement, the forced proximity, the slow dismantling of walls she had spent years constructing. She thought about Marcus's kiss on the terrace, the way his hands had trembled against her face, the desperate need she had felt in his touch. She thought about leaving. The thought should have brought relief. In 2 days, she would return to her familiar life, her familiar worries, her familiar loneliness. She would no longer have to pretend to be someone she was not, no longer have to navigate the treacherous waters of society, no longer have to see Marcus Ashworth's grey eyes and wonder what might have been. But the thought brought no relief. It brought only a hollow ache that spread through her chest like ice. She was, she realized with terrible clarity, in love with him. It was absurd. It was impossible. She had known him for 3 days, had spent most of that time either arguing with him or maintaining a careful pretense for the benefit of others. And yet somewhere between the first confrontation in the blue drawing room and the long night at Charlotte's bedside, something had shifted. The walls she had built so carefully had crumbled, and Marcus Ashworth had walked straight into her heart. Not the stone earl, not the cold, distant aristocrat that society believed him to be, but the man who sang lullabies to his niece, who protected Evangeline from gossips without being asked, who had kissed her in the snow as if she was the only person in the world who mattered, the man who was still, despite everything, too wounded to reach for what he wanted. Evangeline understood his fear because she shared it. They were both survivors of loss, both experts at protecting themselves from hope. They had built matching fortresses around their hearts, and for a few brief moments on that snowy terrace, they had allowed those fortresses to touch. But touching was not the same as opening the gates. And Marcus had told Charlotte the truth that Evangeline was leaving, that their engagement was pretend, that she should not get too attached. He was already retreating behind his walls, preparing for her departure, protecting himself from another abandonment. She should do the same. She should armor her heart against the inevitable pain, should remember all the reasons why hope was foolish and wanting was dangerous. She should accept that this borrowed life would end, and her real life would resume, and the brief, bright flame of possibility would gutter out into nothing. But as she sat in the pale morning light, holding Charlotte's hand and feeling the child's trust like a physical weight, Evangeline found that she could not do it. She was tired of being afraid. She was tired of protecting herself from happiness by refusing to believe in it. She was tired of watching life happen to other people while she stood safely on the sidelines, convinced that she did not deserve to participate. Charlotte shifted in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible, and her grip on Evangeline's hand tightened. Evangeline looked down at this child who had lost so much and yet still dared to hope, and she made a decision. She would not leave while Charlotte was sleeping. She would not leave at all, not without a fight. The house party's final evening arrived with the inevitability of a sentence being carried out. Evangeline had spent the day alternating between Charlotte's bedside and her own chamber, avoiding Marcus, avoiding the other guests, avoiding the confrontation she knew was coming. Charlotte had improved dramatically throughout the day, well enough to sit up in bed and demand stories and complain about being confined to her room. The physician had declared her fully out of danger and predicted a complete recovery within the week. She would be fine. But Evangeline was not fine. She stood before the mirror in her borrowed chamber, wearing another of the dowager's gowns. This one a deep blue silk that made her eyes look like amber in the candlelight. Tomorrow morning she would return to London. Tomorrow morning she would leave Thornfield Manor and Marcus Ashworth and Charlotte behind, and she would resume the life she had been living before a white dress changed everything, unless she found the courage to change it. A knock at the door made her heart leap into her throat. She had been expecting this, had known that Marcus would come to her eventually, that they would need to discuss the terms of their parting and the story they would tell to explain the ended engagement. But when she opened the door, it was not Marcus standing in the corridor. It was Helena. "May I come in?" Helena's voice was unusually subdued. "I have something to tell you, and I would rather not say it where servants might overhear." Evangeline stepped aside to let her enter, her confusion growing. Helena moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds with an expression Evangeline could not read. "I have been speaking with my brother," Helena said finally. "He came to me this afternoon, looking like a man who has not slept in weeks, which, given the past few days, I suppose is accurate enough, and told me that he intends to release you from the engagement tomorrow. He plans to announce that you have ended things due to pressing family concerns in London, and he will ensure that no blame attaches to your name." "That was always the plan," Evangeline said carefully. "Yes, I know, but here is the interesting thing." Helena turned to face her. "When I asked Marcus if this was what he wanted, if ending the engagement was truly his choice, he could not answer me. He stood there, the most articulate man I know, and he could not form a single word." Evangeline's heart began to pound. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that my brother is an idiot." Helena's voice was sharp, but not unkind. "He has convinced himself that you could never want him. Not really, not permanently. He believes that you have been humoring him, playing a role, counting the hours until you can escape this farce and return to your real life. He believes that the kiss on the terrace was a momentary lapse on both your parts, born of proximity and exhaustion, and nothing more." "He told you about the kiss?" "He didn't have to. I have eyes, Miss Hartley, and I know my brother. I saw how he looked at you during dinner that night before Charlotte's illness consumed everything, and I saw the same look on your face when you thought no one was watching." Helena paused. "But knowing that you care for each other and doing something about it are two very different things. Marcus will not act on his feelings because he is too afraid of being hurt again, which means that if anything is to be done, you must be the one to do it." Evangeline stared at her. "What would you have me do?" "Tell him the truth." Helena's voice was fierce. "Tell him that you are not leaving because you want to, but because you believe you must. Tell him that if he asked you to stay, truly asked, not out of duty or obligation, but because he wants you here, you would stay. Tell him—" She broke off, her composure cracking. "Tell him what I never got to tell my husband before his heart gave out. Tell him that love is not weakness, and wanting someone is not surrender, and that the only real failure is choosing fear over hope." Evangeline's eyes burned with unshed tears. She thought of Helena's lost child, Helena's lost husband, all the grief hidden beneath that sharp exterior. She thought of Marcus, so convinced that love was betrayal waiting to happen. She thought of Charlotte, clinging to connection despite every reason not to. She thought of herself, standing on the edge of something terrifying and wonderful, trying to find the courage to jump. "Where is he?" she asked quietly. "The library. He has been there all afternoon, pretending to read while actually drinking too much brandy and brooding about his hopeless future." Helena managed a wan smile. "Go to him, Miss Hartley, and for God's sake do not let him convince you that he doesn't want you. The man is a fool about many things, but most especially about his own heart." Evangeline did not remember descending the stairs or walking through the corridors of Thornfield Manor. She was aware only of her heart pounding and her hands trembling, and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that she was about to do the bravest thing she had ever done. The library door was closed. She stood before it for a long moment, gathering her courage, rehearsing words that seemed inadequate to carry the weight of what she needed to say. Then she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The library was vast, 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves surrounding a space designed for scholarship and quiet contemplation. A fire burned in the massive hearth, casting dancing shadows across Persian carpets and leather furniture, and there, in a wing-back chair near the flames, sat Marcus Ashworth. He looked up when she entered, and something flashed across his face. Hope quickly suppressed before his expression settled into the familiar mask of cool composure. "Evangeline?" He rose from his chair with automatic courtesy. "I was not expecting you." "No." She closed the door behind her, heart racing. "I don't suppose you were." He moved to the sideboard, where a decanter of brandy sat nearly empty. "May I offer you something? The house party ends tomorrow, and I find myself in need of fortification." "I don't want brandy." "Tea, then? Or—" "I don't want tea." She crossed the room toward him, watching his face, watching the way his mask flickered at her approach. "I want to talk to you, Marcus. Really talk. Without the pretense and the careful distance and the assumption that we both know how this is going to end." Something shifted in his grey eyes. "Evangeline?" "Helena told me your plan. You intend to announce tomorrow that I ended the engagement, that I returned to London to tend to my mother, that our brief attachment simply could not survive the pressures of reality." She stopped an arm's length from him, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the shadows under his eyes. "You have it all arranged. A neat, painless ending to an unfortunate situation. It seemed the kindest option, for both of us." "The kindest option?" She laughed, and the sound was sharper than she intended. "Tell me, Marcus, when you planned this painless ending, did you give any thought to what I might want, or did you simply assume that I would be relieved to escape?" His face went very still. "I assumed nothing. I merely recognized the reality of the situation. You have obligations in London, your mother, your position. You never wanted this engagement in the first place. Allowing you to return to your life with your reputation intact seemed the least I could do." "My reputation?" She shook her head. "Do you truly believe I care about my reputation? I have been a companion for 3 years, Marcus. My reputation was ruined the moment my father died in debt. Whatever standing I once had in society, it vanished long ago." "Then what do you care about?" The question hung between them, sharp-edged and dangerous. Evangeline looked at this man, this wounded, wary, impossible man, and felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. "I care about Charlotte, who looked at me this morning with eyes that expected abandonment and asked me not to leave while she was sleeping. I care about your sister, who lost a husband and a child and still found the courage to fight for connection. I care about your mother, who wanted so desperately to see you happy that she announced an engagement that didn't exist and set this whole impossible situation in motion." She took a step closer, close enough now to touch him, though she kept her hands at her sides. "And I care about you, Marcus. God help me. I care about you more than I have ever cared about anyone in my life, despite every sensible instinct telling me that caring about you is the most foolish thing I could possibly do." His breath caught. "Evangeline, you told Charlotte the truth about us. You warned her not to get attached because I would be leaving. And when she told me that this morning, looking at me with those grey eyes so like yours, do you know what I felt? I was trying to protect her. I know you were. But what I felt was not gratitude for your protection. What I felt was grief, because I realized that you had already given up. You had already decided that whatever was growing between us could not survive, and rather than fight for it, you chose to manage its ending. There was nothing to fight for." His voice was strained. "We barely know each other. What happened on the terrace, she interrupted, "was the most honest moment I have experienced in 3 years. You kissed me like I mattered, like I was real to you, not just a problem to be solved or a reputation to be protected or an inconvenient complication in your carefully ordered life. She drew a shaking breath. When was the last time you allowed yourself to feel something real, Marcus? When was the last time you reached for what you wanted instead of what was safe? He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I cannot do this again, Evangeline. I cannot allow myself to hope for something only to have it torn away. When Sophia left, when Edmund... He stopped, his jaw working. I nearly did not survive it. The betrayal, the humiliation, the destruction of everything I believed about love and trust and the possibility of happiness. If I allow myself to feel those things again, and they are taken from me again, they won't be. You cannot know that. No. She reached up and touched his face, felt him flinch at the contact before leaning into it despite himself. I cannot know that. No one can. Love is always a risk, Marcus. It always has been. But the alternative, the endless cold, the eternal loneliness, the slow death of never feeling anything at all, is that truly preferable to the chance of being hurt? It is safer. Safe is not the same as living. She echoed his words from days before, saw him recognize them, saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. You told me that yourself, on the morning after the ball. I have been thinking about it ever since, about all the ways I have chosen safety over living, fear over hope, the certainty of nothing over the possibility of something. Her hand was still on his face. She could feel the tension thrumming through him, the war between desire and fear that mirrored her own. I am not Sophia, she said quietly. I am not going to betray you. I am not going to run away with someone else or abandon you for a better offer. I have no fortune to tempt lesser men, no beauty remarkable enough to inspire madness, no connections that could advance anyone's ambitions. All I have is this. She pressed her hand against his chest, over his heart. A heart that has spent 3 years pretending it did not want anything, and has discovered in the space of 3 days that it wants everything. Specifically, it wants you. Marcus stared at her. She could see him struggling, see the walls trying to rebuild themselves, see the old fears clawing for purchase. What are you asking me? His voice was barely above a whisper. I am asking you to be brave. She met his eyes, letting him see everything, her fear, her hope, her desperate, terrifying love. I am asking you to choose possibility over certainty. I am asking you to let me stay, not because of the engagement or the gossip or the expectations of your family, but because you want me here. Because this thing between us, whatever it is worth fighting for. And if I cannot? The words seemed dragged from somewhere deep inside him. If I am too broken, too afraid, then I will wait. She cut him off gently. I will go back to London and tend to my mother and find another position, and I will wait, because I have spent 3 years believing that I did not deserve happiness. And in 3 days you have shown me that I was wrong. I will not give that up easily, Marcus. I will not give you up easily. The silence that followed was absolute. Evangeline stood with her hand on his heart, feeling it pound beneath her palm, watching emotions flicker across his face too quickly to name. Then he moved. His hands came up to cup her face, both hands, trembling slightly, unbearably gentle. He looked at her as if she was something precious and impossible, a miracle he had not expected and did not know how to hold. You terrify me, he said softly. I know. You terrify me too. I have not felt anything in 7 years, and now I feel everything too much all at once. I know. She covered his hands with hers, holding them against her face. I know. I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to be the man you deserve. I do not know. Neither do I. She smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. We can figure it out together. He kissed her, then not desperately, as he had on the terrace, but slowly, reverently, as if he was learning her mouth for the first time. His hands tangled in her hair, her borrowed pins scattering across the library floor, and she pressed herself against him and felt something that had been frozen for a very long time begin to thaw. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, his forehead rested against hers. "Stay," he said. "Not because of the engagement or the gossip or anyone's expectations. Stay because I am asking you to. Stay because I am too selfish to let you go. Stay because—" He swallowed hard. "Stay because I love you, Evangeline. God help me, I love you, and I have no idea when it happened or how. But it is the truest thing I have felt in years." The words struck her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She had not expected them, had not dared to hope for them, and now that they had been spoken, she did not know how to contain the joy that flooded through her. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since the first moment you looked at me across that ballroom, and I certainly have since you held my hand through the night while Charlotte fought her fever. I love you, Marcus Ashworth, and I will stay for as long as you want me." "Forever, then." His voice was rough. "I want you forever. Forever is a long time. Not long enough." He kissed her again, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. Only certainty, only need, only the overwhelming relief of two people who had finally stopped being afraid. The announcement came the following morning. Marcus stood at the head of the breakfast table, Evangeline at his side, facing a room full of guests who had gathered expecting to witness the quiet dissolution of an engagement. What they witnessed instead was something rather different. "I must thank you all for attending this year's winter ball," Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. "As many of you know, the past few days have been eventful in ways none of us anticipated. My niece's illness, in particular, has reminded me of what truly matters in this life. Not reputation, not propriety, not the careful management of society's expectations, but love and family, and the courage to reach for happiness when it is offered." He paused, his hand finding Evangeline's and intertwining their fingers where everyone could see. "When Miss Hartley wore white to my ball 3 nights ago, she did so in ignorance of my family's tradition. She did not know that the gesture would be interpreted as acceptance of a proposal I had not made. And yet—" His eyes found hers, warm with a light she had never expected to see there. "And yet, I find that fate, in its wisdom, has given me exactly what I did not know I needed. Miss Hartley has agreed to become my wife, not because of the misunderstanding that brought us together, but because in the short time we have known each other, we have discovered something neither of us believed possible." A murmur rippled through the assembled guests. Evangeline saw Lady Jersey's eyebrow rise, saw the dowager's face transform with joy, saw Helena smile for the first time since her brother's betrayal 7 years ago. "The wedding will take place in the spring," Marcus continued. "You are all, of course, invited, and I hope—" His voice softened. "I hope that you will wish us well as we embark on this unexpected journey together." The room erupted in applause and exclamations. Guests surged forward to offer congratulations, their earlier skepticism apparently forgotten in the romance of the moment. Evangeline found herself embraced by the dowager, kissed on both cheeks by Helena, and subjected to Lady Jersey's penetrating scrutiny before the older woman pronounced her surprisingly suitable, all things considered. But through it all, Marcus's hand never left hers. Later that afternoon, They stood together in Charlotte's chamber. The child was sitting up in bed. Colour returned to her cheeks, eyes bright with recovered health, and something that looked remarkably like hope. "Uncle Marcus says you're going to marry him," Charlotte said, looking between them with the skeptical assessment of a child who has learned not to trust good news. "Really marry him, not pretend marry him." "Really marry him," Evangeline confirmed. "If you approve, that is." Charlotte considered this with great seriousness. "Will you live here, at Thornfield?" "Yes." "And you won't leave, even when I'm sleeping?" Evangeline knelt beside the bed, taking Charlotte's small hand in hers. "I will never leave while you're sleeping. In fact, I intend never to leave at all. I'm going to be your aunt, Charlotte, which means I'm going to be here for everything breakfast and bedtime and snowmen and puppies and all the ordinary, wonderful moments in between." "Puppies?" Charlotte's eyes went wide. "Uncle Marcus said I couldn't have a puppy until I was older." "I have been persuaded to reconsider my position," Marcus said dryly. "Miss Hartley made a compelling argument." "She did?" Charlotte looked at Evangeline with new respect. "What did you say?" "I said that every child deserves a friend who will love them unconditionally, and that sometimes the best healing comes from having something small and warm to take care of." Evangeline smiled. "Your uncle agreed, eventually." Charlotte threw her arms around Evangeline's neck, hugging her with the fierce intensity of a child who has finally found something worth holding on to. "I'm glad you wore the white dress," she whispered. "I'm glad you're staying." "So am I," Evangeline whispered back. "So am I." 7 years later, Thornfield Manor blazed with light. The annual winter ball was in full swing, the ballroom filled with glittering guests and the sounds of music and laughter. But in the gallery above, away from the press of bodies and the demands of social obligation, the Countess of Thornfield stood before a portrait and remembered. The painting depicted a man and woman from another era, the 5th Earl of Thornfield and his Countess, the couple whose love story had begun a tradition that had, by accident, transformed Evangeline's life. The woman in the portrait wore white, her hand resting on her husband's arm, her eyes bright with the particular joy of someone who has chosen love over fear. "Mother, Mother, Thomas pulled my hair, and Miss Pence says I have to apologize, but he started it." Evangeline turned to find her daughter barreling toward her, dark curls flying, grey eyes flashing with righteous indignation. Elizabeth was 6 years old, the same age Charlotte had been that fateful winter, and possessed of her father's stubbornness and her mother's sharp tongue. "Did Thomas pull your hair first, or did you do something to provoke him?" Elizabeth's righteous indignation faltered slightly. "I may have hidden his toy soldiers." "And why did you do that?" "Because he said girls couldn't play at war, and I wanted to prove that girls could take prisoners just as well as boys." Evangeline bit back a smile. "While I appreciate the sentiment, perhaps there are better ways to demonstrate gender equality than taking hostages." "What's gender equality?" "Something your Aunt Helena will explain to you when you're older. For now, return Thomas's soldiers and apologize for worrying him. Then you may come back and tell me all about why girls are just as capable as boys at anything they choose to do." Elizabeth considered this proposal with the calculating expression of a born negotiator. "Will there be biscuits?" "Perhaps." "The good ones? With chocolate?" "We shall see how sincere your apology is." Elizabeth grinned her father's grin, Evangeline thought with a pang of love, and scampered off to find her brother and make peace. She would apologize charmingly, secure her biscuits, and probably have Thomas convinced within the hour that the whole thing had been his idea. She was, as Marcus often observed, alarmingly good at getting what she wanted. "Plotting with our daughter again?" Evangeline turned to find her husband approaching, devastatingly handsome in his evening clothes. a sleeping infant cradled against his shoulder. William, their youngest at just 3 months, was oblivious to the ball raging below, his tiny fists curled against his father's lapel. "Elizabeth has been taking prisoners of war," Evangeline said. "I have sent her to make reparations." "She gets that from you." "The prisoner-taking or the reparation-making?" "Both." Marcus shifted William slightly, his free hand reaching out to draw Evangeline close. "Though I seem to recall making a few reparations of my own that first winter. I believe they involved puppies." Evangeline laughed, leaning into his warmth. Through the gallery windows, she could see the ballroom below, the swirling dancers, the glittering jewels, the whole elaborate pageant of society at play. Charlotte was down there somewhere, no longer the frightened child she had been, but a confident young woman of 13, who had, according to the evening's gossip, attracted the admiring attention of more than one young gentleman. "Are you going to be one of those fathers?" Evangeline asked. "The ones who glare at potential suitors and make dire pronouncements about dueling?" "I was considering it. Helena has offered to assist with the glaring. Poor Charlotte. She'll never be allowed within 10 feet of an eligible man." "That is the general idea, yes." Marcus's voice was light, but his eyes, when they met hers, were serious. "I know what it is to be hurt by love, Evangeline. I want to protect her from that. You cannot protect her from everything, and you cannot protect her from love at all. It finds a way regardless of glares and dueling threats." Evangeline reached up to touch his face, the familiar planes and angles that had become dearer to her than she could have imagined. "What you can do is show her what real love looks like, what it means to choose someone every day through difficulty and joy and everything in between, what it means to be brave. You make it sound easy. It's the hardest thing in the world." She smiled. "But it's also the best." William stirred against Marcus's shoulder, making a small sound of infant discontent. Marcus adjusted him automatically, the gesture so natural now that Evangeline felt her heart clench with love. This man, this wonderful, complicated man, who had once believed himself incapable of feeling, had given her 3 children and a home and a life she had never dared to dream of. He had thawed the ice around her heart and shown her that wanting things was not weakness, that hope was not foolishness, that love was worth every risk it demanded. "Do you remember," she asked softly, "that first night in the blue drawing room? You were so angry. You demanded to know who had put me up to wearing the white gown." "I was terrified," he corrected. "Not angry. I had spent 7 years convincing myself that I would never feel anything again, and then you walked into my ballroom and my walls came crashing down. I didn't know what to do with any of it. And now?" He looked at her, really looked, the way he had that first night across a crowded ballroom, the way he had every day since. "Now," he said quietly, "I cannot imagine my life without you. I cannot imagine waking up without you beside me, or raising our children without your wisdom, or growing old without your hand in mine. You came into my life by accident, Evangeline, but you have become the very center of it. That," she said, "is considerably more romantic than anything you said 7 years ago. I have been practicing." She laughed, and he smiled, really smiled, the smile that still had the power to steal her breath. And then he kissed her, there in the gallery above the ball, with their infant son between them and their other children somewhere in the chaos below. When they finally broke apart, the music from the ballroom drifted up to meet them. A waltz, slow and sweet. The same waltz they had danced on the night everything began. "Dance with me," Marcus said. "Here? With William? He won't mind." Marcus was already drawing her into position, one arm around her waist, the other cradling their son. "He has excellent taste in music." They danced, there in the gallery, their steps measured to avoid waking the baby, their eyes locked on each other. Below them, the ball continued in all its glittering splendor. Above them, the portrait of the 5th Earl and his Countess looked down with what Evangeline could have sworn was approval. "I should tell you something," she said as they turned. "A story I discovered about the tradition. The real story, not the one everyone believes." "Oh?" "The 5th Earl's beloved didn't wear white to accept his proposal. She wore it to make one of her own. She was declaring her love, not responding to his. She was choosing courage over fear, hope over safety." Evangeline met his eyes. "She proposed to him, Marcus, just as I proposed to you." "You proposed to me?" His eyebrow rose. "I seem to recall making a rather impassioned speech in the library. After I cornered you and demanded that you stop being an idiot." She smiled. "I believe that counts as a proposal." "Then I accept." He pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. "I accepted 7 years ago, and I accept again now. I will accept every day for the rest of our lives, if you're dancing, holding each other in the lamplight, their sleeping son peaceful between them." Somewhere below, their daughter was probably negotiating for additional biscuits. Somewhere in the ballroom, Charlotte was dancing with someone who might one day break her heart, or might one day make it whole. Somewhere in the manor, Helena and the Dowager were no doubt plotting something involving grandchildren or ice sculptures or both. And here, in this quiet gallery above the chaos, Marcus and Evangeline Ashworth swayed together and watched the snow fall beyond the windows, the same snow that had fallen on the night they first kissed, the same snow that would fall for years and years to come, covering Thornfield Manor in white. She had worn white to his ball by mistake, but she had stayed on purpose, and that, Evangeline thought as her husband drew her close and their son sighed contentedly between them, had made all the difference.